Hi, this is William Smith from CX Today, bringing you all the latest customer experience industry news. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Vasco Pedro, the co-founder and CEO of the AI-powered translation platform Unbabel, to find out a little bit about how businesses can kind of benefit from providing multilingual support. So Vasco, welcome.
Hi, William. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get started, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and the company you founded.
Certainly. You could say that language kind of runs in the family. My mom was a professor of English linguistics, now retired, and I kind of grew with this sense of how important language and understanding language was in the world. And then I did my undergrad in a major in artificial intelligence with a minor in computational linguistics. And then after that, went on to CMU, Carnegie Mellon, to do my master's and PhD in natural language processing. And then since then, been doing different startups, applying AI to different problems, usually related to language. And then in 2013, I had met my co-founder and CTO, João. He had finished his PhD at UPenn in machine translation. And we had met a few years before, and we've realized that we had a very strong shared passion around language. And so 2013 is when we decided to start Unbabel. With this vision of, it's based on this very simple thing, which is, people speak different languages. And even though, fortunately we are able to speak the same language, most of the people in the world don't actually speak one language, and that's never going to happen, right? And so what happens is, as companies scale across and start selling to different markets, they just naturally find language barriers. And I think the insight and the timing for us was that the world is shifting in a way that we fundamentally believe that in the future, companies are going to try to solve language barriers through an AI-centric approach. And so in doing this, what we felt at the time was that the state of technology wasn't at the point where AI by itself was sufficient. So AI was an enabler and augmenter of what was going on from a human perspective, but that humans were still very much needed in the process, both for high quality data generation, correction, strong feedback loops. And so we started building Unbabel at the core, a platform that enables really fast, scalable translation. And then what we thought was, well, where do we start, right? Because this is a problem that is orthogonal to companies in the sense that, it's not just how do I translate my website, or how do I get my product in multiple languages. It occurs everywhere in the company. How do I serve my customers? How do I create customer experience that is consistent across all languages, across the entire amount of interaction of me with my customers, from the beginning, how they find out about me, all the way through sales, to handling the product, to supporting the customer. And so we started in customer service. We said, hey, until now, one of the big challenges in scaling customer support across languages is that you end up with a lot of different teams, a lot of turnover. It's very hard to manage. It's this global operation, which means that only really large companies end up having really good customer support in a bunch of languages. And we were thinking, why is that, right? I mean, it should be a no-brainer, right? There's almost like a customer service gap, if you were born in a country that it doesn't speak English, you're screwed. You now have less access to great customer service in general. And so what we started thinking is, well, AI really can start having an impact there and can really enable agents to be super polyglots, right? And so that's where we started. It's like, hey, let's deploy Unbabel into CRMs like Zendesk and Salesforce, so that if you're a customer service agent, by using Unbabel, you can handle 30 languages, right, or more. And so, which is why I use the term super polyglot, because polyglot obviously is someone that speaks multiple languages, but nobody really speaks 30 languages, right? So, which is a great example of how AI can really augment humans, and that was what we've been doing over the last 4 years. So I would say the first 4 years are really about the underlying infrastructure. The last 4 years are really about how do we deploy into customer service, and with that, it really started emerging this category of language operations. How do we bring the way to deal with language to the 21st century and deploy AI-centric solutions that still very much enable and use the best of humans, but that are truly scalable. And so that's where the whole concept of language operations emerges from.
Well, awesome. And yeah, you mentioned language operations there. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about what kind of possibilities that it enables for customers.
Yeah, one thing we've seen is throughout the life of Unbabel is that there's every department, in a way, every part of the organization is trying to solve this same problem of how do I support multiple languages, and it's not really about supporting multiple languages. Like, how to support my customers? How do I support people that just happen to be in different parts of the world, in different markets, and speak different languages, right? The language kind of a necessity because of the people, but that's really the goal, is support people, right? And what we've seen is this happens in a very like hodgepodge set of solutions, right? You might have the marketing department that has vendors they work with to have websites updated and so on. And then you go to the product organization, they're like, oh, no, we hire our own internal people and we have our own specific set of processes. And then you go to customer service and like, oh, we hire natives and we use BPOs and they're all over the place, right? And then you go to sales and it's like, no, we hire people on location. So there's all of this, there's no one systematic, centralized, scalable approach. And this creates a lot of issues to a lot of organizations. And so the concept of language operations, I think it's akin to the change that we saw in system administrators pre-cloud environment, where everything was on premise and people had a certain set of skills. And with cloud computing coming along, at some point people started shifting and needed to relearn or add to their stack of capabilities new ways of looking at infrastructure. And in a way, what we're thinking is your language stack, the way you deal with languages and you deal with language across new markets, should be part of your infrastructure of scale as a company, right? It should be actually part of your infrastructure from the beginning, but how do we do it in a scalable way? And so the whole concept of language operations is to have one centralized, scalable solution that applies to different areas of business, and that really puts the power and the agency and the transparency and visibility of the underlying things on the hands of the customers. And it can go from, hey, we want something that just works and it's simple, and I don't want to worry about this, to power users that actually want to be able to really customize the internal translation pipelines and optimize engines and do all sorts of really cool stuff. And so we're really putting all of this in one place in a very easy to use interface that gives a lot of people the power to do things they really couldn't do before in a very scalable way with AI at the core.
Well, and your approach kind of combines human editors with machine learning. I mean, what are the benefits of taking that approach?
Yeah, so I think there's a bit of an obvious context setting point, I would say. That is, if we had machine translation that was perfect, right? If there was this system, there was an Oracle system that just translated everything perfect, in a fraction of a second for almost free, we'd use that, right? I mean, so that would be what we're using. And so there's a sense of, hey, it's just AI isn't there. And we don't know if it's ever going to be really, truly there, because AI is language is a very gnarly problem. There's a lot of complexity. Every time we think we solved it, we haven't. Actually, machine translation was the original AI use case in the 1960s, coming from cryptography in the Second World War and emerging. And the first thought was, this is kind of like translating to a new language, like deciphering a code. And so let's get machines on this. And in 5 to 10 years, we'll have this solved, right? And this was 1960, and we're still kind of getting there, right? So certainly AI isn't there. But we do want to benefit from a lot of the advantages of it in terms of scalability, repeatability, predictability, speed. And then the question is, well, how do we actually train models? And then how do we actually make sure that the output is at the level of what we're used to, right? Native, professional, very fluent. And so for that, you need the human component, right? And so we have both the AI components. So and AI in this case is not just machine translation. There's a lot of AI components throughout the pipeline, in a lot of different pieces. But then there's also a community of more than 100,000 bilinguals and professional translators that work in different aspects to improve the systems, to make sure that everything we delivered is top-notch quality. And it's this feedback loop that everything that gets touched by a human gets sent back to the AI. And so this continuous improvement that is driving a lot of efficiencies and gains, both for us and our customers.
And what would you say are kind of the key considerations for success for any business that's seeking to provide multilingual support?
So I think we're rapidly approaching a time where, like I said, a lot of companies are going to start thinking about the language stack from the beginning, right? And part of that is making this so easy, so integrated that it's almost like saying, hey, if you're using, let's say, Zendesk and WordPress and Marketo and a few other tools that a lot of people use, we're going to be so integrated with this that it's going to be super seamless to then scale across languages. But I think there's two key points that is very common. So one is when a company goes into a new market, right? That's kind of an inflection point where usually it's a trigger for them to think, oh wow, like I need to figure this out, right? Because and you see it in a lot of cases. Like a lot of companies end up expanding only through English language countries. Like, oh, we'll do the US, and then we'll do the UK, and then we'll do Australia, and then from then on it's really hard to expand. But that's actually a fairly small part of the global market, right? And we do live in a global market more and more, and we see it every day. With the pandemic, it's like the less location restrictions and geographic restrictions are apparent, the more other restrictions become some of the key areas, right? And what we see is, right now, language is in the top 5 issues for businesses not to be able to expand. And so that part, I think, is something that the sooner you start thinking about it, the easier it is. And a lot of times right now there's a sense of it's an afterthought. It's like, oh, we'll figure it out later. And part of it is because it's until now it's been complicated, it's painful, and it's always this thing that I need to deal with this, right? And so part of the process is how do we create the tools to make it super simple, right? So that you do it from the beginning. I think one of the other use cases that we see a lot of immediate impact is when you already are big and you already have large infrastructure to deal with languages, is the amount of immediate benefit that a solution like Unbabel can bring to the table, because you're really like what we're seeing our customers, typically 50% cost savings in terms of customer service, but which is good, but actually the most interesting things for me is the CSAT of their customers most of the times, like on average, goes up by about 7 or 8% in NPS score, right? And so and CSAT, and the reason for that is, once you're no longer required to segment your team from a language perspective, you can do a lot of cool things. You can have center of excellences. You can have teams that are focused on a particular product line. And you do a better utilization of your workforce and your customer service agents, which means that typically you end up having a much better time to first response. For example, Logitech was a good example during the pandemic, and everyone was buying webcams. Of course, they saw a really great increase in traction, and with that customer service. And so there was like a 300% increase on requests and customer service, which are particularly hard to serve, especially because hiring people during the pandemic was complicated. A lot of times Logitech hires engineers to deal with more complex problems. And so by using Unbabel, they're actually able to cut down the turnaround time from 48 hours to like 12, right? And coping with this growth at the same time, right? And that actually represents real benefits for the end customer, right? Because they get answered faster, and you do it at a fraction of the cost, right? So it's kind of a win-win for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you mentioned that kind of boom in e-commerce and international shopping. Do you kind of anticipate providing multilingual support to become kind of increasingly important going forwards? And if so, why?
Yes, I think multilingual customer support, there's a strong trend towards it, right? I think the more companies can access a global market and the earlier they do it, the more sensitive they are, right? Because what we're seeing is, about 1 in 2 customers buys on a native language website, right? And so that's 50% of the consumers are buying on websites that cater to their native language. And providing customer support in native language leads to a much higher conversion rate. It leads to much more stickiness. People feel more comfortable. They're able to do, they're more willing to give credit card numbers. They're willing to trust, right? Language creates trust. And I think going international was a consideration until recently of large companies. Like, oh, you first don't worry about that. But especially in such a digital transformation world, and I think COVID kind of accelerated this trend for maybe by 5 or 10 years, what we're seeing is, and especially because the networks of e-commerce and the tools and infrastructure for e-commerce, for shipping, for building, are becoming easier, then there's more companies being able to ship worldwide from the beginning, right? Whether it's drop shipping, whether it is, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And so once you do that, you want to be able to access the customers in those markets, right? And if language is the only issue, then you want to support that, right? And if there's a solution that makes it easier, then companies will do it, right? I think at the fundamental level, like I said, I think there is a there's more and more this sense of the customer service gap, of hey, it's kind of fundamentally unfair for you to not have access to the same customer service, for example, just because you don't happen to speak a language. So there's this less patience with it. And another thing that I think we're seeing as a trend is that it used to be that 80% of all online content was English. So realistically, you kind of needed to know English to be online. But now English represents about 20% of content. And what you're seeing is really the rise of the Chinese internet and the Brazilian internet and the Russian internet, where people consume content in their own language. And so even if you are able to ship product to a particular market, if you're not there from a presence and language perspective, then you're missing out on a lot of opportunity and growth.
Well, and you mentioned earlier kind of the very long road that machine translation's been on. Kind of looking to the future, do you see any new technologies or trends coming for language operations?
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting when you start thinking of things from an AI-centric perspective, right? Because what we're seeing over and over is that AI is particularly good at automating repeated tasks in commoditized markets. That's like the low-hanging fruit for AI. And when I think about language operations, there's obviously at the core the ability to do very strong customization of machine translation engines, and that's been going on already for a little while. But we're seeing a continuous increase in sophistication of underlying models. For example, now we just launched our first model that is very it takes in consideration glossaries within the translation, right? And so and this is a trend. Like, it's just we're a bit ahead of the curve, but I think this is going to happen all over. Right? There's a lot of people working on context-aware machine translation, so there's something there. But that's only half the problem, right? For example, internally, I think we're the only system in production that uses quality estimation. And what that does is it's also a neural network-based system that tries to make a decision if the output of the machine translation is good enough or do we need a human, right? And that it really enables us to scale, because the better the AI, the smaller the percentage of things that need human intervention, which means you can better use translators, which, as the scale of the volume that we need to translate, there's an objective increase in amount of words for humans, but a reduction in the percentage of the text that they need to handle, right? And then you have things like, from language operations perspective, is, well, if you have humans creating pipelines of translation where they're saying, well, I need to translate marketing content, and I'm going to get the content in Marketo, and I'm going to deliver it somewhere else, and create a pipeline in the middle. Once you have enough of those, you can start really running algorithms on top of that to optimize and to have, to do a lot of the rote tasks to be already automated, so that humans continue to evolve towards being maestros of symphonies rather than individual musicians, where different AI components are providing a lot of the help to be able to really boost and augment your productivity and capabilities.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on AI and translation. It's been great to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank
you. It's great to be here, and good luck with everything.
Yeah, and if you've enjoyed this video, please do share on social media and subscribe to our channel as well. This has been William Smith for CX Today. Thanks again to Vasco for his insight, and thank you for watching. Bye.